Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's debate. We seem to be having a bit of a seating issue, which we will sort out now. As you will know, the motion tonight is this House believes a society of giving is impossible. The speaking time tonight will be 8 minutes long, and feel free to offer, as usual, points of information at any point throughout any individual speeches. And after the first 6 speakers, we will go into points from the floor. Tonight, our first speaker is James SUZMAN, Director of Anthropos, the world's leading journal on anthropology and linguistics. James.
Thank you, Joel. I hope this is not going to eat out of my time, but I'm going to correct you on being the editor of Anthropos. I'm the CEO of an organization called Anthropos rather than the journal Anthropos. But don't let me disappoint you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time I've addressed this hall, and given the weight of tradition that is here, I've decided to break with one of my own traditions, and for the first time, I'm going to speak with notes. In doing so, I hope you forgive me if I tend towards a little bit of grand eloquence at the beginning, but there is a point to it. Ladies and gentlemen, our collective confidence in the ability of financial alchemists to conjure value out of nothing has disappeared. The West rumbles under the yoke of a new era of austerity, and a decade's growth has been declared phantom. Finance has usurped industry. Personality has trumped character. Meanwhile, the developing world is flocking to cities. Everyone is demanding more things, more money, more time, more hope. The energy output equation is out of kilter, and the world's largest industries are far from profitable in terms of their overall cost to our natural capital. And traditional economists seem bereft of ideas. As a result, predictions of looming environmental and economic catastrophe make us look into our fair-traded cappuccinos and scowl. We wonder if there's anything we can do about it. What can be done? Who can do it? These are anxious times, and during anxious times, we take comfort from the idea that there are better ways of doing things, different ways of doing things, that new things are not only possible, but they are necessary. And as a result, some people choose to seek alternatives. Some do so by occupying things, like Wall Street and such. Still others seek to facilitate change through embracing the universe of new possibilities ushered in by the digital era. Others experiment with things like microcurrencies, such as the Bristol pound, an amazing experiment that's happening far west of here. And the idea to the return of a gift economy is very much part of this phenomenon of looking for alternatives. It reflects something of a shared desire to make a tangible and real difference to the way that we do things in this world. Perhaps most engagingly, the idea of a gift economy aims to extract the production and consumption of goods and services from the teeth of self-interested commerce, and likewise to extract it from the manifold distortions of the markets that have become so much the stuff of everyday discourse these days. It also aims to restore what anthropologists such as myself and Keir refer to as the spirit of the gift, the life that animates the objects that circulate through us and around us, and create and build the relationships and binds them and sometimes breaks them. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to argue tonight that that is not the case. More than that, I'm going to argue that the kind of gift economy that we are talking about here tonight, a gift economy which is free of reciprocal obligation, has never existed. Moreover than that, I'm going to argue that it can never exist, certainly not in isolation of an exchange economy. And this is very much the case in a world which is populated by 7 billion people who are increasingly more interconnected. Secondly, I'm also going to argue that a gift economy in and of itself, while it offers a certain degree of hope, it does not offer any solution to the kind of problems that it proposes to remedy. Specifically, how society adopts value for goods, services, wants, desires, relationships, hopes. But before I explain why, I'm going to do a fairly unusual step, and I'm going to concede the debate in terms of precisely how it is worded. I do believe that a society based on giving is possible. In fact, I don't just believe it, I know it. I know it because I've lived in one, and I've spent most of my adult life living in one. This society I'm talking about is the Jumwasi, the Khon, the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, who I spent 15 years living and working with on and off. And they, in many senses, represent the simplest and, I suppose, most egalitarian of all the different forms of gift economy that have existed before. Obviously, given the constraints of time, I'm going to have to present something of a caricature of this particular economy. But I suppose it's a caricature which is adequate to the discussion we're going to have tonight. Traditionally, the Bushmen were hunter-gatherers. And they were hunter-gatherers by choice, I should add. They were aware of other alternatives. There were other societies that lived nearby them who adopted other ways of living, other ways of using an economy. But like many other hunter-gatherers, they had very little private property to speak of. They were jealously egalitarian. They were likewise absolutely acephalous. In other words, they had no forms of institutional leadership. They neither sought nor created surpluses, and instead they trusted in the generosity and the abundance of their lived environment. There was an absolute belief that the environment would provide what people would need in order to live, in order to survive, and in order to be happy. And sharing and gift-giving created the channels through which the various goods and products that they generated out of their environment flowed between them and one another. In many senses, the Bushmen were an archetypal version of what Marshall Sahlins once referred to as the original affluent society. This was a society in which affluence was based not on material abundance, but on limited material desires easily satisfied. An absolute confidence that when they needed something, they would be able to get it. Now, there are two important elements to this particular sharing and giving culture that are of particular relevance to the motion tonight. The first is that even in this society, this gender egalitarian society, the sense that gift-giving and sharing was not obligation-free was paramount. The movement of goods, whether it was through the intimacy of sharing a meal, or perhaps the relative formality of a formalized gift exchange, always came with unspoken mutual obligations and a deep anticipation of reciprocity. Even though it wasn't accounted for or measured or constituted as debt, all relationships were based on the idea of some kind of ongoing debt obligation being maintained through the process. Gift-giving, sharing, in other words, bounded people through creating interlocking ties of mutual obligation. These, in turn, underwrote, reaffirmed, and expressed the sense of communality that enabled people like the Bushmen to make a living, and make a good living, in what was an unbelievably harsh environment. The second important point from this example is that it shows that gifting networks are by their very nature small things. They are a reflection of intimacy, closeness, love, friendship, reciprocity. An interesting feature of the size of the networks that Bushmen had in terms of their reciprocal and gifting relationships was that they correspond roughly in size and dynamics to the size of the networks that we have, good grief, 1 minute, to the size of the networks that we have in terms of our Facebook relationships. They are extremely small in real terms. They correspond to real necessity and need. And this brings me to the second major point of critique of this motion. And this has to do with what a gift economy would seek to solve. My view is that the problems that we face as a society are not bound up in the principle of debt or implied obligation, or anything that a no-obligation gift economy would seek to solve. Rather, they lie, in a sense, in how our markets and our financial system apportions value to different kinds of things. That is where our problem lies. And if we are to resolve the kind of challenges, economic and sustainability, that we face today, it will involve engaging systematically with the problem of value, and in particular, how our markets might distort value. We've all seen the arguments revolving around bankers' pay and remuneration. We've all seen the disasters around various commodity supercycles and debt supercycles. This is a difficult problem, and this is certainly not a problem that can be solved alone. Certainly, it's something that will involve all of us. Now, from my perspective, as we draw this to a close, and we come to the journey, and we look towards the journey of finding a solution to these long-term challenges, obviously there's great value in looking at things like gift economies. There's tremendous value in understanding how different societies engage with living with closed economic systems. But of course, this is only a small part of the puzzle. And this is a small part of a puzzle which in turn forms part of a far larger puzzle. And we certainly have to work together and look and find ways of finding ways that we can maximize benefit on a planet which effectively is out-resourced. We have a growing population, we have limited options, and we have limited opportunities. Certainly, I think something like a gift economy is a brave place to start, and it's a brave place to look at. But I do not think and do not believe it is the answer to our problems. Thanks.
Thank you. And now to open for the opposition, I'd like to introduce David HALPERN. David is the former Chief Analyst of the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit and the current Director of the Behavioural Insights team at 10 Downing Street. David.
It's great to be here. I haven't been here for a very long time. Let's go through. What I'm going to try and do is essentially encapsulate some of the argument we're going to use against. I'm going to try and briefly say what is it we're actually talking about here, and not that which the proposition is going to try and box us into a narrow caricature of. Why is it really important, actually really genuinely important? And then the last point will really be, which we'll see more of, well, even if you think it's important, could you actually do it? Is it possible in practical terms to do what we're talking about, to have a society of giving, basically, and built around? But let me just start with a kind of personal story, if I might do that, which I think also will belie this issue about can this mean anything in a kind of contemporary society. So I actually have two sons. My youngest son, when he was born, he couldn't breathe, so he had a tracheostomy, an artificial airway put in his neck, and for 4 years we had to manage this airway. And you get really good at managing an artificial airway. 1 in 20 kids will die just from a blockage and so on. He's fine now, he's a healthy teenager, it's wonderful. But the point about the story is at the end of that 4 years, we felt very grateful for the help we'd received, and we said, if there's another couple, or someone else and they want an evening off, we're really good, we can manage an artificial airway, we're really happy to do that. And we said to the myriad consultants and others we dealt with, right? Of course, we were never asked. We'd actually offered, and we were never asked. We haven't built systems, we haven't built, public services that enable people to support and help and show these kind of acts of kindness and generosity towards each other. And actually, it's madness. It's madness to create systems that don't enable that to happen. So using that sort of personal starting point, let me go into why does that matter? What is this thing about? It comes under various names. Sometimes about anthropologists tend to call it, gift economy or whatever. I quite like the term used by the economic historian Avner Offer from Oxford, who talks about the economy of regard, actually, which is like a parallel economy. And so one of the things we have to understand, first of all, is that actually a lot of our current world remains, in fact, driven by this economy of regard. And how would we quantify that and make that meaningful? If you do a time budget study of all adults, and it means anybody over 18 to the point essentially of retirement and to death, and you include weekends and you include the whole lot, right? Time budget studies, and we've got any social scientists in the room who will recognize this method. Then you can work out how you spend your actual life. So as you look forward at your age, you can figure this out. Anyway, what's interesting is that of your waking time as an adult, you'll spend less than a quarter of it in paid work. Less than a quarter of it. So we've taken out sleep already, right? So a lot of it is just messing around and watching TV, going shopping and so on. But a lot of it is just helping other people. It's looking after your kids. It's having friends around. It's all kinds of actually reciprocal exchange. And if you do something, a slightly odd thing to do, and you say, let's quantify that. Let's actually, even in minimum wage terms, work out what would you have to do to have all that kind of nice reciprocity paid for. It's an odd thing to do, but you work out how big a number is it. It's bigger than GDP, right? It's absolutely enormous part of our society and our economy, and it animates big chunks of our economy. And if you just get a kind of sense of it, it does have a logic of its own, the economy of regard. So generally speaking, your friends have invited you around for dinner. Jimmy says, come around, whatever, it's really nice, and had a nice meal. I don't, generally speaking, take my wallet out at the end of the meal and say, that was really great. What do you think, 50 quid, would that cover it? No, sorry, 20. But why is that? Why does that feel so wrong? Because we keep some sense of this parallel set of exchanges in our day-to-day life. So that's the what. For why? Well, why should we care about it? It's sort of there. It's there, but as I said, actually largely unvalued and generally unmeasured in a formal sense. But is it important? It's incredibly important, actually. It's incredibly important even for the real economy, in inverted commas, let alone anything else. It's pretty hard to make sense of Christmas, for example, which actually is quite a big chunk of the economy, it turns out. Go out and buy a load of things and you give them away to other people. And often, actually, economists will tell you it's nuts because it destroys value because you bought the wrong thing, actually. But it's true. One of the ways of quantifying it in a modern society is it gets encapsulated as social trust. Do you think other people are going to be trusted? Is one of the sort of effects that flows out of these kind of exchanges, right? We can try that right now. Generally speaking, do you think other people are going to be trusted? Hands up. Who would say yes to this question? Am I allowed to do that? And who would say no, can't be too careful? Got a few of you. By the way, that shows you a very atypical group of population, which itself is interesting. In Britain today, it's about 30 or 40% would say yes to that question. It varies hugely across economies, across countries. It predicts economic growth. It predicts economic growth at the national level more powerfully than levels of human capital, levels of skills in the economy. It's really powerful stuff for the real economy. But of course, it's really important in other deeper senses too, right? Because actually, it's about the character of the economy and the world that you live in. The reason why the Scandinavians are so damn happy is because they are high-trust countries, one of the primary drivers of it, actually. So it's very consequential in other ways. Acts of kindness and caring and compassion, they matter for our well-being, right? That's why we spend time doing it. The last, though, question, which I'm sure these guys will have a go at, which is, look, this is all a really nice idea, but the problem is you can't practically deliver it. There isn't a way of catalyzing it more. We just have to let it be, right? That's the nature of it. And then just using my day job, which is nudging, actually, in the Downing Street, but we have to have four kind of things. Just very briefly, we say, if you want to get something done, you want to change behavior or how a society operates in some way, make it easy, first of all. Just make it easy. Like, I have elderly neighbors. I would be really happy to help them if they need help, but I don't know what they need. I just don't know, actually. People are starting to build platforms to make that possible. There's a Canadian platform called Ties, for example, which solves that sort of problem. So if he's got, actually I do know he's got a son who's in London, and if he tells me how I could help, I'd happily do it, right? So you make it easy, and actually what you'll find, actually if you make it easy, then these things tend to flow, including make it easy to help someone else and show an act of kindness or compassion or reciprocity. Secondly, make it attractive. It can be fun. It's all right. It can be fun. And one of the things actually that Lily's been working on, it's absolutely got that character, right? It's a fun thing to do. And the great thing about it is we're hardwired generally to find it fun as well. So it's not just altruism, actually. The great thing about when does the oxytocin get released, it isn't when you do an act of kindness, interestingly. It's when you get a reciprocation, when someone says thank you. That's when you actually feel real good. Otherwise, we'd be a population of dupes. Some people go around and being helped, and some people just take advantage. So it's very neat in that sense. So the attraction's built in. Social is the third one. So we do what we see other people doing often, and in particular, we underrate how nice our fellow citizens are, right? That's true in lots of domains. So students similarly overrate how much other students drink. Actually, and that affects how much you drink. So these things apply in lots of other areas too, but it's certainly true around kindness. So if you go across a city, even like London, and you literally drop envelopes or wallets with, a little picture and a few pounds, and you see how many will get returned. There's two interesting stats that come from this. One is that you say, well, actually, even in London, about 70% plus will get returned, right? Which is pretty surprising to a lot of people, but that's the other question. So how many do people think will get returned? Let's say about maybe 20%. So we're wrong about how we think about other people. Actually, there's a lot more virtue out there than we think. And the last one then really is timely. You have to have a timely intervention. Well, look, we like this world, but how would it happen? And then our trick, and I guess this is a fundamental point which we'll work through, I hope, this evening, is that actually we don't just want to defeat this proposition, we want to defeat the kind of line of thinking underneath it, and we actually want to make something happen in the world. And so Cambridge is a really interesting kind of microcosm. The reason why you basically are all trusting is because you live in a very particular environment which actually tends to nurture trust. And it becomes the ideal place where we can actually try it out. We can see if we can create a platform to increase levels of giving and reciprocity and acts of caring. And that's ultimately our objective, not just to defeat the motion then tonight, as they say to you, ladies and gentlemen, but actually in some ways to make it happen here in Cambridge in the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd now like to welcome Felix Martin, who is a macroeconomist and bond investor, whose most recent upcoming book argues that the conventional understanding of money is wrong. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I accepted the very kind invitation to come and speak in this debate this evening, I was very worried that it was going to be me, a professional economist, with a bunch of economists on this side, and a lot of anthropologists on the other side. And I was worried about this because probably some of you have had the experience of going to the pub with economists. And as you all know, we spend our whole time working through our game theory to work out how we can not pay for any of the drinks at the end of it. Whereas if you go with anthropologists, of course, everyone is always trying to do their gift exchange and buy the round for you. But imagine my surprise when I discovered all the anthropologists are on my side. So even if we don't win the debate, we're going to have a better time at the pub afterwards. Now, instead, my opponents, I have discovered, are not dreary old social scientists at all. No, they are a much more glamorous, successful, and experienced in the ways of the world bunch. And we should all sit up and take notice of what they have to say. My view, however, is that they are mistaken in opposing this motion. I think that my opponents have a clear and very valuable understanding, as it happens, of how a monetary economy works. This understanding, I believe, is quite rare. But I believe that, and they also understand that a monetary economy can be problematic and has many pernicious elements. But I believe that the solution they propose is not the one that can help us. Indeed, I am afraid that it will sap the strength of those who really want to reform the current economic system for the better. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with a recent phenomenon which is somewhat the evil twin of the marvelous possibility of a social network of gift exchange which is foreseen by my opponents. This is the phenomenon of Bitcoin. Money, what it is, where it comes from and how it works, has always been one of the most elusive subjects in economics. But it's also always been one of the most popular subjects in economics because it's such a major part of our lives. It was for this reason that the famous American Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Samuelson once said, "Not one man in 10,000 understands the monetary question, and you meet him every day." Well, on April the 11th last month, Professor Samuelson could have met him twice in one day because it was on this day that the Winklevoss twins of Facebook fame were discovered to have accumulated an $11 million hoard of bitcoins. Now, most of you will already know about Bitcoin. I won't go into it in great detail, but its advocates believe that it is a major revolution in the history of money and finance. It's the world's first virtual currency. The story goes that money was once gold and silver, physical stuff. Then someone had a good idea, which is that you could lend money, and credit was born. And then later on, banks were invented, institutions which specialized in managing these superstructures of credit built on physical cash. Bitcoin, therefore, the first virtual money, is a great revolution. This story, unfortunately, is quite incorrect, as the anthropologists know. Conventional money did not begin with coinage, but long before coins were invented. Credit is much older than cash. The truth is that money is a set of ideas, and in particular, three very important ideas. One idea is a concept of value, economic value, which can be applied to anything. The second idea is a system of accounts whereby we can accumulate credits and debts against one another. And the third idea, also very important, is the fact that these accounts can be offset against one another to pay for things. Money is a set of ideas. This, the Winklevosses don't know, haven't realized, and the unfortunate consequences for their investment will come to pass. That's for them. We don't care. What is important is that our opponents do understand this. This I want to stress. They have the correct understanding of how monetary exchange works. They understand that it is a system of ideas. They also understand that it can be a dangerous system of ideas, which is true. We agree, or I agree on this side, on the illness. We disagree on the prescription for it. My opponents would like to eliminate money as the organizing technology of our economy and replace it with a different set of ideas, a variety of other concepts of worth, smaller, more humane, more modest, more specialized, so that we're not governed by this imperial idea of economic value which can be applied to anything and which can organize the entire economy. Now, I do not believe that this is possible, and that is in fact the motion. But I spurn this motion because I feel that that is a very bureaucratic and uninteresting thing to say. Just because something is not possible doesn't mean you people, young people of all people, shouldn't try and do it. So that's not actually what I'm going to argue. I will go further and say that I don't think it's desirable that we try and eliminate this idea of economic value, because there are good things about this idea. There have been societies that were organized without this idea. There was a time when money did not exist. There was a time when these ideas did not exist. We've talked about some contemporary societies where this was true. Let me explain about a historical time that this was not true. Before the invention of money, traditional society, Bronze Age Greece, we know about it a lot. We've got two marvelous poems about it, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Surely even you students in Cambridge have heard of those these days. They describe a world without money. And we also know about the invention of money in classical Greece, because this was the first society that reflected upon this invention and the introduction of these ideas. And strangely enough, their concerns were extremely similar to the concerns that we have today about this new set of ideas and what it was doing to their society. But they realized it had good aspects. They lived in a very traditional society, and they realized that this new idea could provide new possibilities for innovation, for entrepreneurship, and most importantly, for social freedom. And money and this idea of economic value at the core of it, the most important thing about it is that it can be the ideal tool for social freedom. However, it can also go awry. I hardly need to explain that to anyone in this room. We've all just lived through a vast economic crisis that was referred to by James at the beginning of his speech. However, the correct response was also discovered right back at the beginning by the Greeks. The correct response is the democratic control of the monetary system. And I mean that in the sense of the democratic control over, for example, a modern central bank, which issues and manages our money. I mean democratic control over our banking system, which in practice is what produces and manages most of the money we use today. And I also mean it on the level of personal ethics. I mean people understanding how money works and understanding their relationship with money and being able to manage it properly. The danger with the idea that we could shift to a different kind of economy altogether, a gift economy, is precisely that people will lose the incentive to do what needs to be done today. There are very important things we need to do today at the level of fiscal policy. We must be persuading the government to take its responsibility to redistribute wealth, for example, seriously. The government must do this. We should not be doing it for them. Monetary policy. The government should be taking, or the central bank should be taking this role seriously. When it comes to banking policy, there is an enormous agenda to be fulfilled in the reform of our banks. And when it comes to personal ethics, people need to understand money better and understand their relationship with it better. The proposal of my opponents is the dream of the vampire squid. They would love you to go out of this chamber and spend your time concentrating on creating a gift economy and ignoring the real problems that we have with our monetary economy. To sum up, let me leave you with another story of ancient Greece. There was one ancient Greek city-state that you will have heard of that rejected money entirely and moved back to a traditional system which was not mediated by monetary exchange. This was Sparta, a barbaric place where they would fling unviable children down the sides of ravines, where they would send their young men out into the hills to go and terrify the local peasants and so on. Whereas there was one city-state which discovered how to manage money. This was Athens, the height of civilization, Solon, they discovered the first principles of how to manage money in order to quell its excesses. So I am asking you tonight, vote for Athens and civilization. Do not vote for Sparta and barbarity.
Thank you. And now I'm delighted to be welcoming Genevieve Vaughan. Genevieve is a feminist and philanthropist and one of the world's foremost voices on the issue of the gift economy. Genevieve.
Thank you. I hope this is working. It is, yes. I started thinking about the gift economy probably 50 years ago. And I've written about it and loved it for years and years. And I'm so happy to be seeing that there's so many people thinking about the gift economy now. I think it's great. The only thing that's lacking is the idea that the gift economy is based on mothering. And that is what I want to talk about. The gift economy already exists. It exists in those first 3 or 4 years in which children are dependent on unilateral gifts from their mothers. Now that is a period in which all of us have to go through. It is a time now, infant psychologists are telling us, of great prosociality. It's not that the children are passive or egotistical like Freud and Piaget thought. They're not solipsists. They're actually very social beings from the very first beginning. And the mothers interact with those children in a very responsive, interactively responsive way. But that doesn't mean they're exchanging. The children don't learn how to exchange until they're 4 or 5 years old. They know nothing about the market, and they know nothing about that kind of economy. What happens in the early childhood is material communication, giving and receiving. And the receiving is active and creative, as well as giving is reactive and creative. And so we have two sides of a simple logic that life begins with. And that logic is A gives to B. And that is what underlies all of our experience. A gives to B and B gives to C, then A gives to C. That is a syllogism of this very simple logic in the beginning. If you don't recognize the first A gives to B, you'll never be able to go back to it, because when you get into exchange, A gives to B so that B will give back to A, you don't believe in the A gives to B anymore. You don't believe in the unilateral giving anymore when you get to the exchange, which is manipulative, which is ego-oriented. It's what the children in the early times are what the infant psychologists like Stein-Broughton call alter-centric. That is, they find their center in the postural center of the mother, and they create a like-me bridge. That is, I am like you, and you are like me, and so that's who I am. And the mother and child also have the mirror neurons by which they understand what each other feels. And since they're giving and receiving to with each other all the time, that's what the content of what they understand is. That is, the child understands what it is to give by her mirror neurons simulating those of her mother, simulating the experience of her mother, and vice versa. The mother knows what it is for the child to receive and to receive from her. So you have this background or underground of a gift economy in the first 4 years of life that then has to change and adapt to an exchange economy, an economy that's based on giving in order to get back. And that's an ego-oriented logic which contradicts the logic of gift giving and cancels it and hides it. And we've built all of our economics on exchange. But we wouldn't have to do that. We could go back and access what we do as children and use that, because that is what creates the mutuality and the trust between people, is that satisfaction of each other's needs or passing it on. That creates communication in a community. Co-munity. Muni means gifts in Latin. And so that's giving and receiving together. What? Go ahead.
So I don't know what my neurons were doing, but when I was a child, I certainly gave nothing at all to my mother, but received a lot. Also, I took a lot away from my little brother, but I didn't give him anything. So how is that giving?
I think you don't, I think that little children don't realize that. You may have gotten guilty when you grew up. And that's a kind of exchange. Guilt is wanting to pay back for a wrong you've done. But I think little children probably don't realize that, and they do give back to their mother. It's not giving back, it's giving to. The children imitate what their mothers are doing, because the mothers are giving to them, and then they give also. They give some things they have to give, like feces and urine. But it is for the children, you don't know. And I mean, for that consciousness, it's something. And then they have proto-conversations where children give smiles and language, not language, but sounds and so forth. And the mothers receive those. And they have these conversations of gestures and affection. So it's okay if you don't find the feces and the urine very attractive. It's one of the parts of nature that happens, and so you really can't avoid it. So the exchange economy is the economy that covers up and makes gift-giving invisible. And I think gift-giving actually permeates all of life, but we don't realize that it's there. We've made it invisible because we have embraced the paradigm of exchange. And we interpret everything in terms of giving and receiving giving in order to get back. And that is how we've created our monetary system as well. And when we put money into it, we're using a kind of definition of everything in terms of quantity, and that makes it even worse. And what has happened also is that patriarchy and the exchange economy or the capitalist economy have merged. And they have the values of domination and acquisition for more that are destroying the world. And so what we need to do is to go back to the gift economy, back to indigenous models of gift giving that are not so far away from the mother as our market system is, and honor those and step back from the market economy to a gift economy, and which will also honor nature as the great gift giver.
Thank you. And I'd now like to welcome Keir Martin to continue for the proposition. Keir is a lecturer in social anthropology at the University of Manchester, whose work has included research on social change and globalization in Papua New Guinea. Keir.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start by endorsing all of the wonderful things that have been said about giving by our opponents this evening, and in particular in endorsing the impossible project being launched today that I sincerely hope will be a great success, and I think has the potential to enrich many people's lives by giving a context in which they can experience the power of giving. Gifts are indeed an essential part of any society, and an economy without gifting is impossible to imagine. But what I want to suggest to you this evening is the way in which gifting is increasingly presented as a counterpoint to the worst social consequences of governments that place market values over all other social values is at best a little naive and at worst deeply cynical. After all, as David HALPERN has told us, and a moment's reflection will tell us, gifting has always been central to even the most seemingly commodified capitalist societies. So recent anthropological and behavioural economic studies of the culture of high finance have stressed what everybody surely already knew, that networks of social relations within and between firms are as essential to career progression on Wall Street or in the square mile as is number crunching or knowledge of economic fundamentals, and that gift exchange is fundamental to the establishment and maintenance of these relations. The question we need to ask ourselves is, what are gifts intended to achieve? Gifts can indeed liberate the human spirit, but let's not be too utopian. Gifts can just as easily be used to oppress others and to create obligations that bind people to those who oppress them. So the tragic case of the young women in Oxford who were subjected to enforced prostitution and extreme sexual torture by a gang of predators has understandably featured prominently in news reports in recent weeks. And reading the reports, what is clear is the way in which this set of young women, let down by increasingly stretched, cut and underfunded government services, were not saved by the safety net of community-minded big society volunteers empowered by the noble spirit of the gift, but were instead entrapped by those who knew how to use giving as a means of enslavement. At first, they treat you like a princess, reports the victim known as Girl C. They bring you gifts and make you the centre of their attention. But soon the switch flicks, and he started saying things like, "You have to sleep with other men before me because of all the things I've given you and all the things I've done for you." Gifts can indeed liberate the human spirit, but they can equally well be a cover for the cruelest exploitation or the most callous indifference to others. Now, this idea of giving and reciprocity as antidote to the worst excesses of market fundamentalism was at the heart of the already almost forgotten phenomenon known as the big society. As David Willits put it in his public conversion from Thatcherism a few years ago, he woke up one morning and realised that after 30 years of a devil-take-the-hindmost neoliberalism, that there was a, quote, reciprocity-shaped hole at the heart of conservative ideology. Now, I'm painfully aware that the big society is already such a dead parrot that half of my audience is too young to even remember what I'm talking about. But trust me, it was terribly big news for a couple of months, around the time that most of you were probably more usefully occupied revising for your GCSEs and desperately trying to lose your virginity. But I ask you nonetheless to look more carefully at the practice behind the rhetoric of some of those who have begun spouting the language of reciprocity, mutuality, and social giving. Because behind the rhetoric, the policies they enact are a continuation of that devil-take-the-hindmost ideology, removing what little safety net remains for those most vulnerable in our society. Whatever failings our social services may have today, does anyone here honestly believe people such as Girl C will be better served by social workers working in services whose funds have been slashed and whose manager's first priority is to satisfy the shareholders of Serco or Capita? And does anyone believe that we can overcome the commercial pressures to put savings ahead of their vulnerable clients by giving those social workers a handful of shares in these newly commercialised or mutualised social services, when combined with a dose of doubtless well-intentioned, yet ultimately empty rhetoric about the power of giving and reciprocity? In gifting, as in everything else, context is everything. Let me illustrate with a hypothetical example. If I were to begin a romantic relationship with one of you after this debate, and I were to buy you some beautiful flowers from the most exclusive florist in town for our 1-month anniversary, that gift might well be a beautiful gesture, symbolising my heartfelt admiration for your loveliness, your fantasticness, and your all-round amazingness. But fast forward 10 years in your mind and imagine that you've just caught me in flagrante with the third of my PhD students in a row that I'm having an affair with. I remind you again that I am, of course, giving you an entirely hypothetical example in order to communicate my point in a pithy and memorable fashion. I trust we all understand each other. And let's say that after this particular debacle, I go out and I buy the exact same bouquet of flowers from the exact same florist as a kind of peace offering. It's the exact same gift, But in this context, rather than expressing my genuine love for you, it expresses nothing but my own moral decrepitude and my lack of character. The same gesture that is a helping hand in one context can be an insult in another. The same idea, the same gift that represents hope of a better life in one person's mouth can represent the cynical betrayal of that dream in another's. So by all means, I encourage you all to support this excellent imagination.com project. For what my endorsement is worth as an anthropologist and as an alleged expert on gift exchange theory, I'm delighted to endorse it and recommend it to you all. But the idea promulgated in some quarters that such gifting can heal the wounds caused by governments that ceaselessly promote the needs of the market when those clash with the care of our most vulnerable fellow citizens is a claim to treat with extreme skepticism. So paradoxical as it may seem, the best way to promote the spirit of the gift is to vote against this motion. For in the current context, promotion of the idea that gifting can form the basis of our economy is rapidly becoming the last refuge of those who wish not to create a society in which principles of mutuality and care for our fellow citizens are an integral part, but instead for those who wish to find a fig leaf that covers their cynical abandonment of those who are most in need, and a band-aid to be thrown after those victims who are left bleeding in the wreckage.
Thank you. And our next speaker tonight, who needs no introduction and is responsible for most of the exam cramming we've been doing this month, I'm delighted to be welcoming Jimmy Wales, co-founder of Wikipedia. Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't actually personally have very much experience with this kind of formal debate. So you might imagine my surprise to find that our opponents here have apparently misunderstood our position. And I just wanted to make very clear that I do not advocate the Spartan approach to throwing babies in ravines. I also am generally opposed, actually thoroughly opposed to enslaving young girls. And found myself actually quite surprised to hear this kind of debate tactic being used, but what do I know? I've never done this before. So the main thing that I really wanted to talk about is to open people's eyes to think about the gift economy and the gifting society as a part of our overall life and as part of society. First of all, I always love to ask the question, but I think we've already had it answered. How many of you have actually used Wikipedia? But the real question is, how many of you have actually edited Wikipedia? So a significant portion, and the world thanks you for that gift to the world. This is actually a very important thing, and one of the things that James mentioned was the discussion of gift economies as being inherently small projects, small group phenomenon. And yet we have Wikipedia, which is a worldwide global phenomenon. We have over 500 million people using the website every month. Over 85,000 people make at least 5 edits a month. These are very large groups of people who are doing this out of passion for ideas, out of passion for knowledge, and with a real sense of a spirit of a gift to the world. People participate. I could ask all of you who edited Wikipedia how much you got paid for it, and the answer would be nothing. You did it because you saw something wrong that you thought should be right. You wanted to give back something. You've received something from Wikipedia, and you felt, this is a great thing to do. I want to help out. I possibly want to, learn something, participate in some way. And this is really key. So when we think about these questions, the thing you should think about is we have basically 3 spheres in society, 2 of which are well understood and well discussed. We absolutely understand and discuss the economy of exchange, the economy of markets. People, they offer you a job and they pay you money and you go do the work. You go to the store and you buy something and you get it. And this is a wonderful part of life. It's certainly better than enslaving people. It's trading value for value, and it's a great thing. We also understand the society of force, the society of government, where we have institutions in society that do have recourse to force. And what is it used for? Well, in the best cases, it's used to protect these young girls, keep the babies out of the ravines, that sort of thing. This is an important part of society that we cannot do without. It's incredibly important. But we often overlook the gift economy and the gift portion of life. We overlook it because it's ingrained. It's something we do all the time. It's something we do locally. We do it with our friends, as has been mentioned. We do it with our the mothers are giving us gifts, and we hopefully thank them in something more than feces. But we often don't analyze it. We don't think about it. We don't realize it's there. And as such, we tend to diminish it. We tend to not realize how much is possible. I think that this clearly existing, so in fact debating the motion of whether or not it's possible doesn't make sense. It is possible. It happens every day. All of you who will graduate from Cambridge with a little bit of reliance on Wikipedia will attest to the fact that it's possible. We need to think about in society, just as we think about what are the things we can do to improve the exchange economy. So we think about, what are the barriers to entrepreneurship? What are the barriers to innovation? How can we improve the government? What do we need to do to reduce corruption, to increase efficiency? We should also think about these things with regard to the gift economy. What are the kinds of things that we can develop in society that allow and empower people to engage in the gift economy in a larger way, to be able to help out in society in whatever way they feel comfortable with? And at Wikipedia, this is a large part of the design, a large part of the work at Wikipedia has been to think about, there are all these fabulous, very intellectual people in the world who, just like anybody, they're nice people, they want to help out, they'd like to contribute. What are the tools they need? What are the things we can do to reduce the barriers to participation so that people can do this? So Lily's project, for example, is one of the kinds of projects that I think we should be pursuing, where we look at what are the barriers. If someone, if you want to help somebody, your very moving story, David, about your son, you have some expertise, you would love to help another parent. The existing institutions didn't serve you very well. You weren't able to find someone to help. That communication didn't happen. Well, now through the tools of the internet, that kind of peer-to-peer communication, the ability to find people who are ready to receive the help that you would be willing to give is much more enhanced. It's much more possible for people to do that. In the past, if you wanted to know about Queen Victoria, you would never be able to find the people who were willing to spend hours talking to you about that. Now you can find them. They're on Wikipedia. So to sum up, I think it's clear that an economy of gifting is possible. And my view is, how do we enhance that? How do we build that and grow something even bigger and better out of it? Thank you.
Thank you. And we're now going to open up to you. It's your chance to join in with the debate. So we'll have a few speeches in proposition, in opposition, and in abstention. If you could just begin with your name and college and keep them to less than a minute, and also wait for a microphone, we'll make sure it's captured on the recording. So would anyone like to make a speech in proposition of the motion? Please.
Robin Azinovich, St. Catherine's College. I would like to address the reasons why I believe people edit Wikipedia and why it is that so few actually do it. And I think, first of all, as also Mr. Wales has implied himself, a lot of people do it because they use Wikipedia, because it is to good use for themselves, whether what's in there is right or wrong. So that's a notion of reciprocity. If I use Wikipedia and I then edit it to make it better, it's not giving. It's making better what I need. It's reciprocity. This has been acknowledged by Mr. Wales, so that's not actual giving. Another reason why a lot of people do edit Wikipedia is because they have an awful lot of knowledge about something, like Klingon or a TV series, but nobody ever asks. So what are they going to do? They just put it on the internet, and they display themselves, the pleasure for themselves, because I know they are hypocritic a bit, maybe, and then it just stays there. It's not for others, it's not giving, it's realizing yourselves for yourself. So with editing Wikipedia, in the vast majority of cases, there's nothing at all which is necessarily linked to giving, although in very rare cases it might be, of course. Thank you very much.
I think we'll give Jimmy the right of reply on that one. Thank you. And would anyone like to make a speech in opposition of the motion? Over here. The microphone's just here. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks. Well, I'd like to further the point that was just made about reciprocity and gift giving not being mutually exclusive. And first, I want to point out that it doesn't matter which scale you examine a network at, and small-scale societies actually do resemble modern societies. And these are some of the most highly cited papers of all time in Nature and Science, getting 10,000 to 15,000 citations. There's even the Hadza tribe, which is the longest-standing hunter and gatherer tribe that shows these same characteristics as modern societies. Then, without exchange economies and gift economies aren't mutually exclusive in the sense that one of the biggest gift economies is pharma right now treating parasitic diseases in developing countries. They have absolutely no profit to make out of the drugs they develop for these parasitic diseases that are so schistosomiasis, elephantiasis. So they donate these drugs and treat nearly 1 billion people, but it could perhaps develop into an exchange economy because if you're improving and liberating them from absolute poverty, they could be trading partners later on. And then lastly, you're not eliminating money by having gifting, you're capturing losses and valuing them, and you're providing a public good that a central government planner doesn't have the capacity to do.
Thank you. And would anyone like to make a point in abstention of the motion? Over here.
Emily Shaw, Robinson College. I'd like to think that a society of giving really is possible, but I think that the way that that would be implemented is something that really needs to be looked at. If you take, for example, organ donation, a lot of countries have problems with an opt-in system where they're not getting enough organs for people who could possibly do the most altruistic thing when they die. And the way that some countries get around that is by doing an opt-out system where you're automatically entered into this. But I would, that would implement a society of giving, but it somewhat defeats the point of the giving in itself and the benefits that the individual will feel from doing that action. So I think that the way that it's implemented at a societal level does need to be looked at.
Thank you. And we'll do a second round. So would anyone else like to make a speech in proposition of the motion? Over here.
Excellent. So there is a point that the opposition hasn't made yet, that I'm hoping Mrs. Cole would be able to make, and then give me her number afterwards. And that point, what we're talking about here is a society of giving. That means a society that is based, that works, that functions through giving. That is not the kind of society we live in today. That means that we will need to undergo a certain transformation in order to reach that stage. A lot of regimes, a lot of governments, a lot of groups of people have tried in the past. And they have failed. They have failed because of the 30% that David has mentioned earlier. 70% returned the envelopes with the coins. 30% didn't. The problem is that as soon as we try to actually implement a society of giving, there will always be individuals who are ready and are in a position to make use of the situation, abuse it in some way that will certainly worsen the situation for others who live in the system. So I'm thinking of the Soviet Union. I'm thinking of French society post-1789. I'm thinking of societies where there were genuine efforts to transform, to make a society based on altruism. And yet, these sort of societies have always, historical precedent showed, been taken over by interests which were not necessarily so positive. Thank you.
Thank you. And could I get a speech in opposition of the motion? Over here. You've been keen for a while.
Thank you. Mason Edwards, St. Catherine's College. I would like to propose a retort to the ideas that, one, giving must be done on a small scale, and secondly, that there must be a direct reciprocation. I'd like to propose the Mozilla Project, an open source initiative, and I'd like to say that this is not a small project, this is a massive project, where many individuals spend thousands of hours updating software code to improve the code itself, not to get a direct feedback for themselves. And the other element to this is that unlike speaking Klingon, being a software developer is an incredibly valuable skill, and those are hours these individuals could have monetarized very successfully. So they are given not just their time, but giving up the opportunity for a fiscal incentive. And lastly, it's fatuous to say that the militarization of Sparta is somehow related to its fiscal choices and its eugenics. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, could I get a speech in abstention of the motion? Over here.
Jonathan Deakin, Jesus College. Maybe it's just me, but I don't really understand where either side stand. You seem to be saying that you don't think an economy is viable based just on giving, but the opposition don't seem to be saying that either. So I want to clarify that.
James?
I think that's a very good point. I don't think there's a tremendous amount of difference between ourselves and the opposition. In fact, my conclusion at the end of this debate is that we're actually agreeing rather outrageously. So I think we can only defer to one thing, and that is the Wikipedia definition of a gift economy. The Wikipedia definition of a gift economy is a gift-giving economy where there is no obligation to reprise or return that gift in any way, shape, or form. In other words, the gifts are given altruistically. And I think we have to use Wikipedia as the ultimate arbiter.
Thank you. And now to conclude for the proposition, I'd like to introduce Douglas Cochrane. Doug is a Cambridge graduate in economics and the twice national debating champion. Douglas.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I I came back to the Cambridge Union and I was hit by waves of nostalgia. And I thought about how 3 years ago, I was exactly where all of you are now, fooling around when I should have been studying for my exams. You really shouldn't be here, really. If you study hard, you may very well get a first. And if you get a first, you may very well get a very high-paying and stressful job. And if you get a high-paying and stressful job, you will have an excuse when you get a call from the Cambridge Union Society saying, Doug, one of the proper speakers has pulled out. We can't get anyone to oppose gift giving. I did not study. I did not get a first. I got a second-class degree, a second-class arts degree from the University of St Andrews, and before I came here, actually. And I just felt as though I had particular knowledge of the topic that was at hand tonight, because if you have a second-class arts degree from the University of St Andrews, you really have to rely on the gift economy, because the real economy doesn't work out for you. I was also taken by the sociologist's work on the opposition, who said that there was an age between 0 and 3 to 4 years or so when children were entirely dependent on their parents. I've so far managed to stretch that out to 25. And David HALPERN was saying that you spend a quarter of your waking life in paid work, and I thought most of you may have thought that was an underestimate. I thought that in my case is probably a very high overestimate of what's actually going to happen. So, you really all should be studying for your exams. This is not going to be worth it, this speech. I just wanted to start by addressing the point that was made regarding the definition of the debate, and don't we all agree with each other, and isn't that really terrible? I think this debate is about starting from the common ground both sides have about small networks, about friends who buy drinks for each other in the pub, invite each over for dinner, and don't necessarily expect cash exchange in return. Now, that's something we all agree can both happen, and it does happen, and it's good, and we should all participate in that. The question is, how well and to what extent is that a generalizable principle for the whole of society? I think that's a very fair definition, very eminently debatable. I think both sides have followed that principle throughout the debate. And I just want to bring up two examples that I think illustrate well the point that we on the proposition have been making in this debate. The first of which was brought up in one of the floor speeches, that of organ donation. And does it say something? I think it does, about society's attitude toward gift giving, when we find that the vast majority of us aren't even willing to give up something we cannot possibly need, our organs after death, to save other people's lives. And the opposition would make this, and I'll take the point just to say, the opposition would make this the point of our whole society. And I'll take the question. It's definitely possible. Hands up, how many of you have given a kidney? Okay, that's really the point I was trying to make. The only other example that I want to bring up is a sort of a cluster of examples of where this project does appear to be generalizable. It really seems to be damaging to our proposition case today. And those are the cases of Wikipedia, and then I think Mozilla Firefox was mentioned as well, of people who were giving, not really expecting anything in return, and in many cases contributing something of social good. And I think all of those examples, all of those points seem to align to be a very damaging counterexample for our side. But there's only one factor I want to point out that both of those examples have in common, and that is a lack of scarcity. Now, obviously we all have scarce time to some extent, but some people will spend their leisure time on hobbies and things they find very interesting, on creative projects. And that's good and that's wonderful, and I love Wikipedia. And if I'd gotten off it, maybe I wouldn't have had a second-class degree, but there you go. But I don't think this is the way in which we can organize society, where society is bounded by scarcity of resource, where my loss is necessary in some instances for your gain. Where there are mutualistic interactions, by all means, let's pursue them, but I don't think they happen frequently enough. And I want to do that, I want to prove that point by just asking you all a question. I won't ask for a show of hands on this. Think about all the giving that you've done. You'll think about people who, contribute to Wikipedia or people who buy their friends around in the pub. Think about the giving you do, but then think about the recipients of your gifts. They're probably people you know. They're probably people close to you, with whom you've common interests. And I would make the point they're possibly not the neediest people, those most in need of the gifts that you could possibly supply. And I'm not trying to accuse you, I'm in the same position. My point is to say that all of us are selfish, all of us are self-interested. And if we don't start from that premise, we'll never reach a better society if we rely on people to give instead. Now, I would just give one further example of this point before I move on. Consider even the attitude that we have in society today, contemporary society, towards those who try and encourage us to give more. You can experience it yourself. Right outside town centre every Saturday, there's people asking you to give money. What is the attitude of students and of townspeople in Cambridge to those sorts of individuals who want to sign you up, take your credit card details, etc., etc., etc.? It's hostility. It's hostility. And I think if that's the way in which we think about gift giving, trying to make it the basis for the whole of society is going to be completely unsuccessful. And the penultimate point I want to make is that it's just very impractical. Even if we had all of the best people in the world with all of the best intentions, this gift-giving society just wouldn't work. And as one of the speakers in the proposition pointed out, we did have an example of an effort to convert society into a gift-giving society, the big society, within at least my recent political memory. And I remember David Cameron, he wrote an article in which he talked about the big society, in which he talked about the spirit of voluntarism and gift-giving that was going to inspire us all to civic action. As he put it, for example, if neighbours want to take over the running of a post office, a park or a playground, we will help them. And if someone wants to help out with children, we will sweep away the criminal records, checks, and health and safety laws that stop them. Quoting from an article here. Yeah, I'm not so sure about the last bit, so let's take the case at its highest, the first bit. To be honest, though, when I get home from my job at the end of the day, I'm not thinking, do you know what I want to do with my evening? I want to band together with my fellows and run the post office. And isn't it kind of arrogant to assume that I could? I mean, I don't know anything about delivering mail and sorting out mail. Why shouldn't we have a system where all of us could pay some money, not as a gift, but out of compulsion, so that people who did know how to organize these sorts of services could do so in an efficient and productive manner that would benefit us all? Sufficiently generalized, we once in an earlier age might have called that theory democratic socialism. And it's certainly something that I think myself and some of my colleagues in the proposition would want, if we had more time, to explain and to try and sell you today. The very last point I want to make in summing up for the proposition today is this. I think that there is a certain immorality to the language of gift-giving. And what is the attitude you were always told as children to take when someone gave you a gift? You were told to be grateful. It's the proper and natural response. But I don't think that when we deal with a world that is full of such dramatic material inequalities, that we should ask the poor of our world today to feel grateful when they benefit from the largesse of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. I'm very glad those people give and give generously, and it would be a better place if we all gave more. But I don't think the premise we should start from is that the whims of a few should decide who gets what they need to survive and to get on. I'd prefer that society arranged itself on different lines, not assuming that we're good people, but assuming that a society based on compulsion and redistribution can make us all at least better off. And that is why I ask you to propose the motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker tonight, Lily Cole. Lily is a Cambridge graduate, supermodel and actress, as well as the founder of Impossible.com, a peer-to-peer gift economy network. Lily.
I want to start by thanking you all for giving your time tonight to come here. And also saying that when we had one of the proposition drop out this week, I suggested we pay somebody to come because I thought that would be quite an ironic display of this, and we couldn't. So I want to point out all 4 men here have actually given their time, even though they're against the motion. First and foremost, as some of you might be aware, I've been working for the last 2 years on trying to build a gift economy online. I want to say from the beginning, it's not trying to eradicate the financial system and money as we know it. And what I'm excited by is the idea that the internet offers potentially a multiplicity of paradigms to coexist, and that you could potentially give and buy and earn money in the same day and not see them as so distinct from one another. And the reason I'm optimistic about that is because experientially I feel like I've been living in a monetary economy and a gift economy for most of my life. And when I start to analyze what experiences in my life I value the most, a lot of them come from a kind of gift economy of sorts. Usually friends, family, and often strangers too. And some of the most beautiful memories I've had of being alive have been those interactions where somebody's helped me or I've helped somebody else. And I've had a kind of interesting relationship with money, I have to say, because I've gone from being quite poor to being quite rich, and I've traveled to countries where people are very poor, and I've traveled to places where people are very rich, and the relationship between money and happiness never correlated in any of those situations. And one of the reasons I came to Cambridge to study originally social political science was I was curious about that relationship, and been trying to unpick it in my experience ever since. The idea to do a gift economy came from experience, as I just said. And then since then, I've been doing a lot of reading of texts, anthropological, sociological research that theoretically backs up a lot of what I believe experientially. That when you give, you release chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine that makes you happy. I mean, I'm sure you've all had that experience. You do something nice, you walk away, and you feel good about yourself. I mean, no? Right? And then the idea of return, the idea that there's a positive psychological debt. I know that James critiqued that earlier. I don't think that that debt as such is a negative. I mean, I have people in my life, my mum's sitting in this room. I have a huge psychological debt to my mum who's given me loads. And I don't regret having that debt at all. You know, a lot of my relationships that I'm most grateful for, I call that debt gratitude. And I think gratitude is hugely important to bond us to one another. And I think those are the bonds that I'm hoping Impossible or any other gift kind of behavioral things try to encourage. And then there's the idea of reciprocity, that social studies show that what comes off that is reciprocity, that there's the expectation, not the expectation, there's the impulsion to return, whether it's directly to that person or to somebody else. And that's the positive kind of cycles of giving that we hope to engender a tiny bit more with Impossible, but probably already happening in amongst all your lives. And that, I think, counters a lot of the arguments that have been going backwards and forwards tonight about this idea of whether it's self-interested or not. From my understanding, it is in many ways self-interested, and it's realizing for myself that the act of giving has often enriched my life, and I've seen it return to me in indirect ways that I trust it will return, that has made me continue down that. And I think if I ever in my life continued to give and felt starved by that process, I probably would have stopped and been like, okay, society sucks. I don't. I find the more generous I've been in life, the more generous people have been back to me, and it's not direct. And losing the kind of direct relationship is where I encounter trust, is where I encounter trusting that it's going to come back, whether it's from somebody else and in a different measure, trusting that relationship. And trust to me has been potentially one of the biggest breakthroughs I've had in experiencing the gift economy and building Impossible. So in building this social network, I've put money in, people have put money in, but a lot of it's being given. Somebody like Jimmy, for example, has been giving hugely to the project for the last 2 years. My technical partner has done all the development for free as a gift because he believes in the idea, and has given so much in that process that I've met my own trust walls internally. I had a moment where I thought, okay, I should offer to pay him back. I'm going to make it, really clear that I intend to pay him back in a few years when we've made enough money that we can do that. And he was actually really offended by that offer. One, I think, because it suggested probably that it would it would make what was a beautiful relationship a transaction and close what was being kind of bound in that relationship. And two, it suggested my lack of trust that he would continue for no other reason because then he believes in a bigger idea to support the system. And that was a wonderful barrier for me to break through. And trust has kind of recurred to me a lot in the thinking around this. And it sounds quite absurd to say, but last weekend I was painting money. I wanted to explore my relationship with money because I think we all, well, no, I shouldn't speak for we all. I put a lot more into like that object, which is a piece of paper, than a piece of paper should deserve, I think. And I think collectively we do that. We forget that that it grows on trees, literally. But we treat it very differently. And I was painting out and leaving the word trust, which I discovered it's quite interesting. You can find trust, unite, and serve on a $1 bill. And I was painting with my godchildren on Sunday. And my godson is 6 months old. And just the simplicity of the thought crossed my mind. What does this mean to him? Nothing. None of the kind of collective psychological, social meaning we've imbued that information, that object with, applies in his reality. By contrast, his 12-year-old sister, my goddaughter, was there, and she was happily painting $1 bills, I think, because they looked like Monopoly money to her. And I said, how does that make you feel? And she said, it's just a measurement of transaction. She's very intelligent and precocious. And then I thought I'd kind of play with her, and I started painting a £10 note. And her face fell, and she freaked out. And she said, I don't think I can watch you do that. I went, but it's just a measurement of transaction, no? And she went, yeah, but I don't see those very often. And it's a £10, but what does that mean? She's like, well, you can get lots with that. I went, yeah, but why can you get lots? Because that will persuade somebody to do something for you. And wouldn't it be great if you didn't need that to persuade somebody to do something for you? Then what would that object hold? I'm not against money, and as I said from the beginning of this project isn't against money at all. I just find that I've been brought up in a culture that bombards me constantly with messages about money, and advertising is constantly about money. You might all say that the gift culture happens and is a big part of our culture. I don't see loads of adverts talking about offering me stuff for free and gifts. Most of the dialogue around me is concerned with money. And I would love to see this gift economy that I think most people on both sides of the panel have agreed is part of the fabric of our social systems, to be utilised a bit more, catalysed a bit more, for us to trust in it a bit more, so that potentially there's a bit more of a balanced equation, and that object is less of a kind of totem pole in our current society. because I have 1 minute left. I also want to say that we launched Impossible on Monday, and this is just to show it in action. Yesterday we went under a tree in front of King's College for the day to let people tie their wishes on. I know it's very silly and hippie, whatever. Tuesday night, we didn't have any blankets, and so I was trying to work out how we could get blankets to be under the tree. And I thought, let me just test Impossible. So I posted out on Impossible, I wish for a blanket to borrow tomorrow, and amazingly 2 people replied. I don't know if any of them are here, but 2 people replied. Hey! And we had a dialogue, and they turned up on Wednesday morning and loaned me 2 blankets, which I've kept clean and are in the other room about to give back. So it's happening, and people left some wishes, and I thought it'd be really interesting to just read a couple out and see if there's any in the room who'd actually do it, because I thought that'd be one of the biggest tests of this idea we've been talking about. So if somebody wrote, I wish, and then you get also, well, I shouldn't offer anything because that destroys, doesn't it, the point. I wish for a singing lesson. Would anybody in this room offer a singing lesson? Even if you're not a good singer. No? No? Yeah, we've got one. You got beat by that guy. Sorry, I'll have to get the next one. Do you want to give a sing lesson? No, or you want to give it to this guy down here? Do you want it? No, okay, you win giving a singing lesson. This one is a real winner, so you're going to have to be really quick. I wish for someone to bake a cake for. I'm going to go until I run out of my minute, so. I wish for someone to paint outside with me after my exams are over. You guys, you can join up, because that sounds like a group activity. Will you pass that back to them? And you're not supposed to do this in debates. I'm breaking all the rules.
Fine.
Yeah, this is quite specific. I wish that I could find someone to teach me art, philosophy, and politics. That's a lot. And in exchange, I could teach them physics. Yeah, I'll teach art.
Couple more.
What? What's that? I wish for a lemon drizzle cake or a lemon tart. Oh, yeah. Leo told me he can make lemon tarts, so. Can I borrow someone's dog to walk each week? Does anyone have a dog? Do you have a dog? Yeah. There you go. I remember the boy who wrote that, and he was really excited that might get fulfilled, so he'll be over the moon. All I want in life is to play the bassoon. That would be pretty magic. Any bassoon teachers? No? Sorry. I wish somebody could help me launch a Cambridge jogging group. Anyone want to jog? You guys all have to do these, by the way. You can't just... We pass that back, thanks. I wish someone to teach me Japanese. Don't feel peer pressure. No other Japanese people who want to teach? Last one, I wish to borrow someone's cat for a day. That sounds really ominous, but does anyone have a cat? Anyone have a cat they want to give away for a day? Okay, well, we got more than half. That's pretty good.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers tonight, as well as for all of those who have agreed to take part tonight, and as Lily said, you are now committed to doing that, so we appreciate it. So all that's left is to vote on the debate, which we'll do by the doors through which you leave. So ayes to the right, nays to the left, abstentions down the middle, and we'll be announcing the results in the bar in 15 minutes. Thank you very much.